Cheers. I'm only drinking water, but I brought my wine glass. Hello, and I just lost my cue. Let's start this again. Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour, brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it's our mission to unify the adoption community and elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connection. I'm Michele Kreigman, an adoptee, and the guest host for this May happy hour. We're glad to have so many of you join us from all over the world, including Australia. It's wonderful to have each of you here with us. If you haven't already, please say hello in the chat and let us know where you're from. We do have a few housekeeping items that I think Beth is going to pull up so you can all see. And I'll read it, but you can also, read along with if you want. So please remain on mute. Raise your hand on screen or using the virtual hand to be recognized. You may post your questions or comments in the chat as well. If you're experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thoughts, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988. This is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. And then I'll hand this back to Beth. I think you had.
Yes, I want to talk briefly about our programming. Are you seeing that, everyone? Happy Hour is our signature program, that is where you are tonight. First and third Friday of each month, we get together and we have special guests, we have authors, we have organization heads, all sorts of things. And so first and third Friday of the month, you will want to be looking for what our programming is. And then we have 3 groups that meet monthly as well. Dr. Joyce heads up our reunion group, Putting Yourself Together After Reunion. Her next episode, if you will be June 18th. It is the second or the third Tuesday of each month, depending on her schedule, but June 18th is the one that will be coming up. One of our other programs is First Families, Birth Parents Journeying Together. And while the majority of the attendees are probably birth parents, adoptees are definitely welcome. And I believe that one should be June 13th. So keep your eyes out for that. And then the program that closes out the month for us each month is Danielle Gaudette's Self-Love Essentials for the Adoption Constellation. Now, we are not having one in May. She has a personal conflict, so we are not having one in May, but you can look for her in June. June 27th should be the next program for that. So if you look at the dates, you can see just about every week, NAAP has something going on online, so you can kind of get your fix in of hanging out with the Adoption Constellation. And I believe that is all
Beth,
for me.
Beth, I'm going to add one thing, and it's not all detail nailed down, but the third happy hour, the third Friday of June, the second happy hour of the month, Marcy had asked me to come on and talk about some of the novels that I've written with adoption themes. So that'll be something to look forward to. And I hope I get to see you guys again.
Okay. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead, since you mentioned that one, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the next happy hour. Diana is going to be our guest. Diana is here with us tonight. Hijacked, Unveiling the Secrets of My Canadian Birthright. She will be here June 7th. And I believe that's already up, that you can even register. So you will want to do that. You will not want to miss hearing Diana. And then we've got Michele coming up for the second one. It sounds like possibly in June. So lots of good stuff ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm really excited. One of my favorite podcasters and favorite group admins in adoption land is with us. I think this is the first time, right, Jen Matthews?
Yeah.
Time that we've been able to get you to come on. So I'm so excited. And we talked a little bit this morning, and it was really interesting the amount of twists and turns that happened. It wasn't like you had the reunion, you got all the information, met everybody. This was really something that happened over years, and it sounds like it happened in waves. It was really, really something that I'm excited you're going to be able to share with us tonight. So what
Well,
I'll do is I'll ask you, how did this start, or what got you to search? Some people never search. Many of us do. Is there one turning point or one motivation that happened?
well, it's kind of like okay, so growing up, I had a lot of anger towards my first mom because dogs. Sorry about that. If there's thunder, they bark. Hang on. Okay. So I was born in 1971. I'm a closed adoption from the baby scoop. And I actually had like no information at all. I was just told that my mother was 16 and from the North Hills of Pittsburgh. And that was literally the only information I got.
What did you get about your birth father? Did you get anything?
Well, it was inaccurate. They said the facts I was told was your mother is 16 and your father is 17 and they're from the North Hills of Pittsburgh. But my dad wasn't 17, he was 21. So that was inaccurate. She just wasn't old enough to take care of you was what I was told. So I was told when I was 5 and I didn't take it well. I had like a full-on meltdown. I freaked out and was like cried myself to sleep that night. I couldn't wrap my head around like why I wasn't with my mom. If I have a mom out there somewhere, why am I not with her? I couldn't process it. And so most of my childhood, like I was just angry at her because I realized looking back, it was a defense mechanism. It was easier to be angry than it was to feel sad. And also I grew up with silent generation parents. My adoptive parents were much older. And all I ever heard was but you're crying, I'll give you something to cry about, which they never did. It was just an empty threat. Or don't be such a baby and that kind of stuff. And so I was taught pretty early on to like shove down any negative feelings I had around my adoption except the anger. And then my adoptive mom is Mexican. I call myself a trans-ethnic adoptee.
Okay, what do you mean by that? And I learned so much from you this morning, so I'm gonna jump in and ask you to explain all these concepts for other people, and because I just thought it was really interesting, your wealth and breadth of knowledge.
I am European. My grandmother, my maternal side they were colonists, and my adoptive mom is Mexican. She came from Mexico when she was 24. Didn't know the language or anything like that. And my dad had been working in Mexico. They had my sister pretty much right away and then came to the United States. And then after, not being able to have another kid, they were offered, hey, would you be interested in adopting? So I call myself trans-ethnic because I don't really see my mom as like, people associate Latino with being brown, people of color. To me, she never was. But if you think about like Mexicans, they're all either some mix of Spanish and indigenous, and like there's a wide spectrum. And so she's definitely more on the lighter side. And I have cousins that are on the much darker side. So it's a different ethnicity. I grew up with this Latino ethnicity. We just had tacos for dinner. I speak Spanish. I went to Mexico every other year as a little kid and had to learn to speak Spanish so I could play with my cousins. And and all of that. And so here, actually,
Oh, that I didn't know about you. That's interesting. So you were raised somewhat bilingual then because of
yeah,
your adoption.
yeah, I was. Hang on 1 second. I lost my pictures, but I'll show you real quick.
You got some good
Um,
pictures there?
I have a couple pictures of me with my cousins when we were little. Um,
You
oh,
know, this is the part of reunion that I love. I love in other people's stories because I get to look at them now and back then, and also see how they match or don't match the people that are important to them just by looking. I think that's always, for me, one of the favorite things about hearing about someone's reunion.
I can't find it. Oh my gosh. I accidentally closed the window. But yeah, I I'm just gonna go. But so yeah, I grew up speaking Spanish, and like I honestly identify as Latino when I am around like people speaking Spanish. I start like thinking in Spanish, if that makes any sense. Just because I was conditioned so much. And I'm not
Mhm.
fluent. I didn't learn the grammar. You know, like my Spanish level stopped at a certain level because um I never needed to learn to read and write in Spanish, as long as
Well,
I
can
could
I never
communicate.
learned how to parse a sentence the way you're supposed to when you take grammar class in English.
Yeah,
So it's kind of, yeah, speaking it is great though. If you know, if you want to find, if it's easy and right at the top find the folder with the photos, we can wait a minute and just keep
yeah,
talking.
I'm looking. Did you want to, is
Okay.
there any other
Okay.
questions you want to ask?
So can you explain the phrase trans ethnic?
So because my mom's Mexican and it's a different culture. It's a totally different culture.
Really?
And that's basically what it is I because I am not, that's me with some of my cousins a couple of years ago. If you can, you see
Yeah,
that?
I see the difference. Yeah,
Yeah, so
I
they're
see it.
definitely darker than my mom was. Um, but yeah, that's my cousin Wicho. She passed away, unfortunately. She had leukemia.
Oh
And
no.
then she's her and I are the youngest. There was a third that was even, he was 1 year younger. So there's me, and then she's a year younger, and then there was another one who was a year younger, but he passed away also. He had
Mhm.
hemophilia. But we were just being goofy.
Oh, there's some I didn't see. I like this.
Yeah, we were being silly. It was just nice to be back together. This was in 2013 when I went to New York City for one of Joe Soul's healing weekends,
Hmm.
and my cousin was living in New York at the time, so he invited me to stay at his house, and then I went weekend, which was, it was actually really good for me in a lot of ways. So
So I'm gonna jump in here because and please share the names of it. You're talking about how good it is to be in person, but when you can't do that, there are groups on Facebook, which I think most of us know. What are the names of the ones that you administer or moderate?
oh yeah,
I did not share them at the beginning, so that's on
oh
me.
no, that's okay. Yeah, so well, it starts off with conversations about adoption. I have a page, um, which is for the name of the podcast that I came up with. Um, and so, the page is to support the podcast, but then I made a group, which is a private group. It is adoptee centered. Um, I'm sorry, I'm not more organized. But it is
Oh no,
adoptee,
this is really good.
it's adoptee centered, but everybody is welcome. So we have, you know, first parents in there, we have adoptive parents, we have hopeful adoptive parents. However, the adoptive parents that are not like child centered kind of get filtered out pretty quick. So, um, if they come in and they start making comments that are not very child-centered. The adoptees in the group will definitely let them know that in no uncertain terms, it's just not how we
Oh,
operate
good.
in this group.
Okay, good.
But I do try to like keep the drama to a minimum because I know I've been a lot of adoption groups. I've been
Whoops,
involved in
we lost the
online
volume.
adoption communities since like 2001. We
2001, okay.
yeah, with old Yahoo groups and things like that, like way back. And I've seen through the
So
years all
you've
kinds
been
of
doing
drama.
this for 23 years, is something
Yeah.
like that?
Well,
Wow,
I went through
okay.
reunion in 2001. So yeah, but that's what that you would ask me about what led me to search. So my adoptive dad had a lot of health problems throughout his life. And when I was 19, he passed away from cancer. And that was really hard. I was straight up daddy's girl. And it was hard to watch him go. And then I apologize for my barky dog. And then a year later, literally we had a double whammy. His mom ended up developing leukemia, which is of course a blood cancer. And we moved her in. My sister was long gone at this time because she was 9 years older. So she wasn't around for any of this. But my grandmother passed away the following May, and my mom had to take care of both of them. And I was so traumatized from my dad. Like, I remembered everything about like what went on with him, but my grandmother, I blocked it. I blocked it out because I was very close to my grandmother too. Like when I was a teenager, um, I I partied with my grandma. We would on Saturday nights play Scrabble and watch Golden Girls. So I was my wild teen years. And I was really close with her, and losing her too was really hard. So that's really started getting me thinking about medical history. Um, because I already
Were
had a lot
you
of
afraid that you might also, come down with leukemia because was so close to you?
no, nothing like that. I have a lot of medical trauma. Like I could probably talk for hours. So because of my dad's health problems, they were very, very well aware of like hormonal issues, and my growth was stunted. Um, I didn't grow right. I was very, very small for a long time. So I got taken to a growth hormone specialist. Like every 6 months, I'd have to have blood drawn and my wrist x-rayed to check my growth plates. And it was a whole lot. And so like I knew I wasn't genetically related to him. It had nothing to do with that. But what I thought about was, well, now my sister knows what's in her medical history, and I absolutely know nothing. So I started to get curious after witnessing that happen. But I still like wasn't really like ready to admit I wanted to search because I still had this anger at my first mom for not being with me. And then so what was the real kicker was, you guys know Maury Povich, the show, like, you are not the father. That's what it turned into, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, what was the name of that show? You are,
Maury Povich, he used to have an afternoon talk show, and it was all drama stuff. But back in 94, 90, no, it was 96. I was at my sister's waiting for her to get home from work, and I just turned the TV on. And he had on his show, he reunited an adoptee and her first mom. And you have to
wow.
understand, as being a baby scoop closed adoption, I never thought that, yeah, I know they're adoptive parents. I never thought that was even possible, because as far as I knew, I wasn't supposed to look for them and they weren't supposed to look for me. So I'm watching this reunion, sitting on the couch and like silently sobbing, like literally tears and snot just pouring out of my face, man, as I'm watching this mom and daughter meet for the first time. And they're hugging each other and they're crying and they look alike and their mannerisms are similar. And I was like, oh my God, like it blew my mind because that was the first time I even knew that was a possibility. And at the end of the episode, Maury spoke and he said, if you are adopted or if you gave up a child for adoption, you can go online to mutual consent reunion registries. So they were online databases where you put in all your information, your birth date, the city where you were born, gender, what you looked like, what you knew about your parents, and the parents could do the same. And lots of matches happened that way back in the early days of the internet. And it was amazing. But I would spend hours and hours. There were so many of these databases, just to tell you like how many people were looking back then in the 90s. And
Well, I know that New York State had one, and then there was something called the Soundex Reunion
yes,
Registry.
International, Reunion Soundex Registry, or ISSR. It was a paper form that you would print out and fill in your information and mail it in. And they reunited a lot of people as well. And then like, because there was no commercial DNA available, your ultimate step, if you couldn't find, was kin solving. And they would charge like $1,500 and they could usually find within a day. It was amazing. I don't know how they could do it. But yeah, so that really set me on the path of wanting to search. And then in 2000, well, actually in 99, I got a piece of paper in the mail about a in-person adoption support group. And I wasn't ready to deal with it, I guess, yet, because I got it again in 2000, at the end of 2000. And that's when I joined. It was a Yahoo group. That was the first one. And it was called Pittsburgh Adoption Connection. And it was founded by a first mom who had made it her life's goal to reunite adoptees and their moms. She was a girl who was sent away to an unwed mother's home and was forced to relinquish. And then the adoptive parents ended up being of the faith where they don't go to the doctor when they have health problems. And they did not with her daughter, and it caused severe brain damage. And I think she was really driven by that to try and reunify and undo what she perceived as harm that she had done, even though she wasn't given a choice. But it was amazing to have that group. We would chat every Sunday. We would meet once a month in person. And it was fantastic to support each other through our searches. But she knew exactly what I needed to do. And she was like, you have to write a letter to Orphans Court. You have to ask for an intermediary. And then you ask for this specific intermediary because she's sympathetic to adoptees. And then, just wait. And so that's what I did. And about a month or so later, I got the letter from the court saying I was appointed the intermediary I asked for. And then
you knew enough about how it worked to know which intermediary you wanted.
no, the
That's
birth mom
interesting.
who ran that group knew who. She's like, you asked for this person. She knew where records were kept. Like her and another birth mom actually broke into a mattress factory on the riverbank because she knew there were hospital records stashed there. Yeah, she was nuts. I love her. She's something else.
And I'll just add, just from what I've heard, how important what you were able to do really is. At Catholic Charities in New Jersey, well before we were able to open records, had an intermediary. And there really was the feeling that if you got the intermediary that knew how to talk to a birth mother, she would address the birth mother's fears. And there was much more likely to be openness. And less shame and less being overwhelmed. But if you got the wrong one, the adoptee wouldn't even get to hear their birth mother's voice on the phone because the intermediary was their one shot. So that's very wise that they really got to know the intermediaries.
Well, this lady, her name was Kathy Leahy, and she was amazing. And she described it to me. It's the craziest thing, right? With our closed records. she told me literally, she's like, you would think there were nuclear codes in your file. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, what she could do in order for her to access my records, she was literally put in a little 4x4 security glass square room with a desk and a chair, and all she could take in was a legal pad and a pen. That's it. And she was watched the whole time she was in there.
She was watched.
Yes. Like, I'm like, who am I? Like, I'm just a nobody. Like, why all this security? You know what I mean? And
Okay.
it's just crazy.
Well,
But
here
yeah,
here in Jersey, we call it like trying to crack the witness protection program.
yeah,
You know?
yeah. Basically, um, I'm sorry she's barking so much.
You know what? It's funny. I have a cat here. I hope you can't hear, but he hears the dog and he starts banging on this little window to my right. So they're zooming off on their own.
Oh God. Well,
Yeah.
storm coming, I think, and she hears the thunder, and it's her job to tell me there's thunder coming. So, you know. But yeah, so the intermediary was great, and she's like, okay, and she called me step by step and told me what was going on. And she's like, all right, on Monday I'll be able to go in and access your file. And I was like, okay. She's like, I will call you on Monday after I'm able to go in there and get you your non-identifying information. And so Monday I was babysitting my niece, and I was in my little house that I was renting, and thankfully she was napping, and the phone rang, and it was Kathy. And she's like, well, I have news for you. And I'm like, yes. And I'm like shaking like leaf. And she's like, I found your grandparents because they're still at the same house.
They were still at the same house.
Yes.
Wow.
And
Wow.
she's like, I can't find anything on your mother right now. And I asked her, I said, like, I was allowed to be, given her, the first names, the non-identifying information. And I asked her, I said, so what was my mother's name? And she said her name was Deborah. And you know that feeling when you're trying to remember something and it's like on the tip of your tongue, and you're like, what was that? It was like that. It was that kind of a moment. It was like I already knew and she was reminding me. It was the weirdest feeling. And
Wow.
yeah, and I was just like, okay, So she's like, well, do you want me to call your grandparents? And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of like what we're doing here. So she did. She made the call. She called and she spoke to my grandmother. And my grandmother had to get my grandfather and ask him if he was okay with it, because defer to the man. And he was like, yeah, he was all about it. And so the intermediary calls me back, and hang on one second, I'm gonna try something. My mouse is asleep.
Oops. Okay. Meanwhile, my cat is lost interest because we lost the audio on the dog. So now that it's us humans, I'm kind of curious. Can we do a poll in the chat? How many people here have found biological family? If you're a parent, a birth parent, or an adoptee, or donor conceived, just out of curiosity. See Mary Scott, yeah. Kitty Revert, Diane, yeah. Oh, you have a great story. Ashley Davis, yeah. Lisa Winehouse. That's actually really interesting. And now I ask about family. Back, years ago, I'd say, how many people have found their birth mother? And we're fortunate enough that more and more of us are able to not only find our mothers, but are able to find other family too. And some of my favorite people are cousins. And it never occurred to me that I could search for them. So that's been kind of a nice plus in all of this. But we have some interesting. I have one person's photo up here. That works. Okay. And I think Jen was just trying to sort of deal with the
Sorry down
dog and the
here.
thunder, and she'll be right back with us. One thing that we haven't mentioned, and some of you probably already know this, that you can also find Conversations in Adoption on Instagram. And she had mentioned TikTok, but there's the Facebook group, the podcast, the Adoptees Only Conversations in Adoption, and that I think this is going to come up organically anyway in her story. There is a kind of a quiet but important group for adoptees who found a grave and at the end of their search. And so we're going to get into some more of that too. And we had an interesting conversation about the pros and cons of video on Instagram versus TikTok. So from a technical point of view, I'm really curious about hearing more about that too. Okay. Trying to see.
Okay.
Page. Okay. And we have still more people joining. This is terrific. I think this is wonderful that so many people have set aside time tonight.
All right, I'm sorry about that.
No,
Okay.
and my cat now lost interest and has left, which is a blessing.
Well, I
So,
brought her in the room with me, so maybe
Ah.
she won't feel so.
right.
And I forgot to mute myself. My kid was like, "Hey, mom," like, not right now. Okay. So anyway, where was I? Oh yeah.
Well,
So she
you were
called my
talking about the
grandmother.
intermediary, and while you were out, I changed topics just so you know,
Yeah.
to mention that you you have a group for finding a grave and you're on Instagram, which I don't think you had a chance to mention yet. And so it'd be
Yeah.
lovely to get the links maybe at the end. Either I'll look or maybe Beth can look and we can plop them in later.
Well, I didn't mean to open this, but this is my reunion photo. My
Oh,
grandmother was unfortunately deceased when I found. But I spoke to my grandmother for the first time that Monday, and I jumped right in and met them 2 days later because I'm crazy. And
what kind of
actually,
preparation, what did you do in those 2 days? That
I
must have been a
worked.
crazy 72 hours.
I worked. My adoptive mom actually drove me to go meet them, which I'm glad she did because I was having a nervous breakdown the whole way there. And the first thing I thought when I saw my grandmother's face is like, well, that's what I'm going to look like when I hit 70. I swear to God, that was the first thing I thought. And I
She's
mean, because I
beautiful.
immediately saw the genetic mirroring when I saw my.
That's a good looking 70.
Yeah.
That's
And that's
nice.
my grandfather Herb, and behind me is my uncle Bob, who literally found out about me the day before, because my grandmother managed to not tell anybody about me for 30 years that I was alive, except for I think her sisters knew about me, and a couple of my mom's friends knew about me. But yeah, this was meeting them for the first time, and it was this whole big hallmark moment, like my grandmother and my mom hugging each other, and my grandmother
Oh,
saying, "Thank you for taking care of her for us," and my mom saying, "Thank you for giving her to us," and just two of them sobbing. It was very dramatic.
oh
Honestly,
yeah.
it felt like I was in a
Oh,
Hallmark
yeah.
movie, like no joke.
But
Um,
more interesting than Hallmark even.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. It really is. Um, so yeah, the groups, because I did find and my mom was deceased, I started a group called I Found a Grave, because that's what we were calling it in my first group that I was in, is we were saying, when somebody found a deceased parent, it's I found a grave. And so it is a very niche group, because it is just for adoptees. I asked about allowing NPs and before, and the adoptees were like, nope. they They just really want it to be a space just for
Hmm.
them, because the way they're looking at it, the NPEs usually know at least one side of their family, and while it's all a shock and it's just as hard, they I did ask them and put it up to a vote. So that's how that ended up playing out, because it's not just like my group. I started it, but it's for them, and it's a very quiet group. And um adoption already is like a disenfranchised grief. Like,
Okay, you know what I'm gonna do here, right? I'm gonna
what?
stop, I'm gonna stop you because that was really an interesting concept, disenfranchised grief. And that almost feels like yet another isolating experience that adoptees may encounter when they
Yes.
find out they've lost a parent.
Yeah, not just adoptees, NPs also, because like even just finding out later in life that somebody was not telling you the truth, and that, part of your genetic mirroring, like this definitely applies to all sides of that. Um, but disenfranchised grief, it's known as a hidden grief or sorrow. It refers to any grief that goes unacknowledged or unvalidated by social norms. Um, it says this grief is kind of minimized or not understood by others, which makes it particularly hard to process and work through. And I mean, if that doesn't identify like adoption, because people out there, you can't even get them to believe that there's trauma involved in adoption, you
Mhm.
know, and so, I mean, it's just like Brian's movie, The Ghost Kingdom, how, you have to live with all this stuff that what could have been. And like going to a reunion brings up a whole bunch of that, because you meet them and they're like great people, and you're like, God, I could have been here, you know, and that's really hard. I could have known my brother. My brother is not a good person. And like maybe if I'd been around while he was growing up, he wouldn't be the way he is. Like there's so many what ifs that when you first are going through reunion and learning about adoption, like you're just overwhelmed and your brain is swimming, and it is really, really hard to process it all. And I was telling Michelle earlier, like, my best advice that I've ever, like, I try to impart to people, like it's my unsolicited advice. If I find out somebody's about to go through a reunion, I'm like, please, please, please don't jump into anything, expect nothing, and um, make sure you give yourself plenty of time to process, you
So
know.
then I have to ask you,
Mhm.
it sounds like your advice today is different than what you did back then. So I guess what did you learn from, and I don't want to do any spoilers. You have more of your
Yeah.
story still to tell, and I'm looking forward to that. But for what you've shared with everyone so far about meeting your grandparents and your brother, are there things you would have done differently, knowing what you know now?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And see, the thing is, I knew nothing. I was 30 years old and had known absolutely nothing about myself. It's really easy to say that now, that I would have done things differently. But like now, knowing what I know, if I knew that then, I would have done it differently. But not, you know what I mean? If that makes sense. If I knew, I was just so hungry for information. Like I
Mhm.
wanted to know everything now, you
Sure.
know, because you go so long in your life not having a clue, about where you came from, what your heritage is, you know, who your parents were, like, how did you come to be? How did you come to be adopted? And just all of it. And so the disenfranchised grief, it's real, like there's a lot to process and grieve when it comes to adoption, you know. Like I said, I've been on this path for a long time now, so I've done a lot of grieving. Um, some people try to talk about healing from adoption. I don't believe that it's something we can heal from per se.
Okay,
I consider it more like a journey or a path,
okay.
like a metaphor. I like metaphors. So like a trail through the woods, and there are parts of it that are easy, and there are parts of it that are really, really hard. And
So for this first part
yeah,
of the trail, this, 48, 72 hours,
yeah.
knowing what would you have done differently, and you obviously were only 30, you don't have the wisdom you have today, but what would you have done differently?
Knowing what I know now, what I would have done differently is I would not have jumped into meeting them quite so fast.
Really?
Yeah, I would have probably, I'm not saying I would have waited a long time, but I would have maybe had more phone calls first before, just like racing to their house 2 days. I mean, everybody was in 20 minutes of me,
Oh,
literally, or 20
wow.
miles of me. Um, like my paternal family
Right
too. We didn't
nearby.
even get to that side yet. Um, yeah, so I probably would have gone a little slower. I would have definitely not jumped into participating in a whole bunch of family activities that I did right off the bat, because that didn't give me time to process. I was working full time at the time at a ATV shop, which was really funny. I was thinking about getting my motorcycle permit because of where I was working at the time, and I find them and they're all bikers.
They're all bikers.
They were all bikers, yeah. My
Oh,
uncle has 2 Harleys. My grandfather had a bunch of motorcycles. My brother had a motorcycle. Like they're just, yeah, they're all, it's
okay.
just so weird. Um,
So did you bond over that, at least for the first meeting?
we talked about it, the first meeting is such a blur. Um, I was like shell shocked while it was happening. So my mom and my grandma were like immediate, like two peas in a pod. And I had gone to my mom's house the night before. That was the other thing I had done. And I ransacked the family photo albums and pulled all these pictures of myself out, one from when I was growing up. And
Okay.
just to show my grandma, like here's me at this stage. And at this stage, and at this stage. That's what figured she might want to know. And so I'm sitting there at the dining room table. My grandpap's he's in the living room, and I just hear him chuckling. Every so often he would start laughing. It was kind of surreal. And my uncle is just standing there staring at me. And
Staring at you.
yeah, because he didn't know I existed, and it was just a lot for him too. And like I would look at him, we were staring at each other, and then we would go outside like and talk. And my mom and my grandma are across the table from me, and my grandma got out the photo albums, and she's showing my mom all these pictures of my mother from when she was a kid. And I'm not involved in the conversation directly. I was kind of talking to my uncle and stuff. And then I hear her say, here's Debbie with her rabbit, and here's Debbie with her guinea pig, and here's Debbie with this. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I go to my pictures, I'm like, here's me with my rabbit. Here's me with
Wow.
yeah, that was really cool.
So you were
And
both animal people.
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
look
And
like her?
she had a horse up until she got married when she was pregnant with my brother. And I have been obsessed with horses since I was a little kid. And so I often wonder if like while she was pregnant with me, she was out back in the, backyard talking to the horse and you know, and I feel at peace when I'm in a barn with horses and stuff. It's just, I don't know.
Oh,
It's like heaven for me. I did
that's a
that when I
really
was in my
nice
20s. I
connection.
worked with horses, so.
Yeah, that's a nice connection.
Yeah, and
Did
another
did
thing is I used to collect horse figures when I was a kid, and I named them all because I could not have a real horse. And here I had a figure of a Palomino named Sunny, and that was my mom's name. And it was a Palomino.
mm,
So that was really trippy.
that I think that would be, yeah.
Yeah, when I had that realization, it was like getting hit in the head with a bag of bricks. I was like, wow. So when I met my grandmother, she asked me, she's like, do you have any idea who your dad is? And I told her that the intermediary could only give me non-identifying information, but she told me his name was Robert. And she immediately sits back and she goes, Bobby Lucas. Does that make so much sense? And I was like, oh, I'm like, who is this guy? You know? And my brother,
So your grandparents didn't know who your father was.
no, my mother didn't tell them.
She
She
wouldn't
put
tell
it on
them.
my birth
Okay.
certificate, but she did not tell anybody. And I feel like she put it on my birth certificate because she wanted me to know. Because by law in Pennsylvania, you didn't have to write the birth father on there until after 74. So she made the choice to put his name down on the birth certificate.
Mhm.
And
So I have a question, since it's
yeah,
Pennsylvania, and it may not be something, that you know the answer to. I'm kind of just throwing this out there. I had heard that it was possible to search, that records were not sealed in Pennsylvania until 1980. Is that something that you're familiar with?
I believe I remember my first mom friend telling me about that. Something along that. I don't remember the dates exactly.
Yeah, like
But
it was
I
one,
believe there
it was the
was a
last state or one of the last states to take
yeah, there
away
was a
OBC
period of
access.
time where you could search. But yeah, then they sealed them up and I was really angry about that. I'm like, that's not fair. I was born before that. So it shouldn't account to me. You know, like I should be grandfathered in. But that's not
Right.
how that works. So at this point, you can get an uncertified copy of your original birth certificate, which is baloney, and I won't send for it out of principle because I want my original. So they charge you $20 and then they type up the info in a sheet of paper. It's great for people that don't have any other way of finding out what the names are, but
Mhm.
it's still we deserve our originals. And so based on principle alone, I won't get that one.
Okay. That's strange that they still kind of want to keep you, 1 foot away from your own document. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
it was all designed to protect the traffickers. I'm working on I've been doing some research into Georgia Tan was a member of this organization in California called um what was it called? Oh, Adoptee Association of America, but it was an adoptive parent association. There was not an adoptee in it, and they were the ones who first pushed for records to be sealed in California. And
Wow.
for a period, she was elected president of the organization. So I am working on connecting that. I actually messaged Barbara Raymond earlier today to ask her if she knows if there's any actual records of Georgia extorting adoptive parents for money because it comes up in stories, but I need to know if there's actual first account record of that. Because if there are, that's a direct connection to the
Yeah, and
laws.
Barbara Raymond writes about extorting adoptive parents, by Georgia
She
Tann,
she wrote The
in
Baby
her
Thief.
book, The Baby Thief. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
So yeah, so she's I love her. I had her on the
yeah,
podcast too, and an
yeah, she's
actual Georgia
great.
Tan survivor. I've had a lot of really great guests so far. I'm only on episode 45. It's a very small following, because it's a very unique kind of podcast.
And now we
Um,
know about it, so.
yeah, it's literally just an organic conversation between me and an adoptee or a first parent, and we get to know each other and share our stories.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
the Georgia Tann, that's interesting. I didn't know the connection with California because she was based in Tennessee, and her
yeah.
practices were so corrupt
Oh
that,
yeah,
Barbara Raymond's now husband, Fred Greenman, was
yes,
able to get records opened in Tennessee just
yeah.
based on
But she
her
would fly babies out to
malpractice.
California all the time.
Ah, okay, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. She popularized adoption by advertising babies for adoption in syndicated papers across the United States. It started in 1929 and it just went on until her death, I think.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an amazing book, and I'm sure that was an interesting conversation with Barbara Raymond.
I have
So to get
ADHD,
back
so
to
I'm
your
sorry I'm all over
meeting,
the place.
yeah, to get back to meeting your mother's family,
Yeah.
after that first meeting, how did it go from there?
Well then she called my brother. Oh yeah, that was the other mind bender. So in the first conversation with my grandmother, she's asking me what high school I went to. And I told her, and she's like, wait a minute. And like I could hear the wheels turning. She's like, I think your brother went to that school. So in one sentence, I learned that I had a brother. And then I learned that I went to high school with my own brother, which was a lot. Um,
Wait. So he was close enough in age that you were there at the same time?
yeah, my brother's 2 years younger than me, and
Wow.
he was being raised by his paternal grandmother. And because my mother was deceased by this point, and our mother, and he had gotten expelled from his high school because he's, like I said, he's not a really good person. And my grandmother, or his grandmother, was determined that he was going to graduate. So she paid tuition for him to go to another high school, not that far away. Like I said, we were within like 20 minutes or 20 miles of each other. And it ended up being my high school. And
Wow.
we weren't in the same grade. He was younger than me, but I got bullied a lot, and he happened to make friends with one of the kids that bullied me. And lo and behold, my younger brother bullied me in high school. And I
Ah,
told him, I said, if I had realized then that you were my little brother, I would have kicked your ass instead. But um,
yeah.
that was really, I had a hard time with that because I had to process those things. One, that my mother was deceased, and two, that I was in high school with my own brother and that he bullied me. Um,
Yeah.
those were two big chunks of information that really messed with my head for a while. Um, like
Sure.
a lot, a lot. So like the first thing I did when I got off the phone with my grandmother was call my best friend who was the same age as him. And I was like, do you remember Tom Seaman? And she was like, I think so. Why? And I'm like, what do you remember about him? She's like, he was an asshole. And I was like, damn it, because then I knew it was the right guy. And my great grandfather told me not to trust him because he stole from him. He was like, he had issues. His grandmother didn't even let him go to our mother's funeral. He was like 9 when she passed away. Why would you not let him go to his mother's funeral? Like, I don't understand that. Can anybody explain that one? Like a 9-year-old boy, and she didn't let him go to his mother's funeral. Like that had to be damaging in some way, you know? Um, so yeah, when I went back the following Saturday, and my brother was there so that we could meet. And I tried to have a relationship with him and be his big sister, but I, he made things weird. He told me my older sister was hot. Don't do that.
I'm sorry, you're fading out, so we didn't hear that.
He made things weird. Um, but he's like, I know exactly where, your dad hangs out. He hangs out at this hotel every Thursday and does karaoke. And he's like, let's meet there. And when he comes in, I will let you know that he's there. And like,
Hmm.
anybody ever go to a bar to meet your birth father? Like, I
I
can't,
think that's a first. I think
I
that's a
still can't
first.
believe I did it. So I'm at this bar with my brother. He's over by the door. My dad walks in and he whistles, like he's real subtle, right? He's like, hey, Jen. And he points at him. I'm like, thanks for, why don't you get the airplane flags out? And I immediately start shaking like a leaf, and I go into the back
Oh,
room. And I called my friend, the birth mom who was running that group, and I told her, I was like, I can't do this. I'm like, I can't. I'm like, I'm shaking like a leaf. She's like, Jen, she's like, you may not get another chance. She pushed a lot. She's like, you've got to do this because you don't know when you're going to get another opportunity to talk to this man, and da da da. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I was really struggling with how to approach a stranger in a bar and tell him he was my father. Um,
yeah. I don't think there's a guidebook yet for that
no,
one.
there's not. So he's at the bar, he's having a drink, And I walk up to him and I was like, hi. And he was like, hi. And he like leans back and he looks at me and I'm like, how are you? And he's like, I'm fine. And I was like, I think you knew my mother. And then he's like, steps, turns around in his bar stool and looks at me a little closer now. And he was like, oh, he's like, who was your mother? And I said, Deborah Bauer. And now he's looking at me even closer. And he was like, really? He's like, yeah, I did know your mom. And I was like, oh, good. You know, now I know I got the right guy. And I was like, well, I know this is like an awkward thing. I said, but I just wanted to let you know that she put you down on my birth certificate as being my father. And then he's like really examining me. I felt like I was under a microscope. And he looks at me and he smiles and he's like, well, he's like, not that I wouldn't love to be your dad. He goes, and I'm not saying I was never with your mom. He goes, but it was after, you know, he's like, what year were you born? I was like 1971. He was like, it was after 1970. And I'm like,
Oh.
okay. He goes, but he goes, I know who it was. He's like,
Oh,
he's like,
okay.
it was this guy, this other guy named Tom. And he's like, and they hung out together all the time. He goes, unfortunately, he's deceased as well. And I was like, wow, okay. And this was a whole lot of information to process. And so at first
So
I
did
didn't
he know about your mother's pregnancy? Did
know.
he have any kind of warmth towards you? What was this like?
Yeah, I mean, he was a very good family friend. Like he hung out with my family all the time. So
Oh,
it wasn't
okay.
like, ew, get away from me. You know. Um, so we chatted, you know, and then I went back in another week and he got me the contact information for this. Let's see if you follow me on this one. This sister, wait, the ex-sister-in-law of the guy he thought was my father, because she was still in contact with that man's mom and brother, her ex-husband, and they lived in Florida. So her and I started emailing and she sent me a picture of this guy. And you know, when you want to believe something, you look for things. And so I took it at face value because also in 2001, DNA test for paternity was $400 per person to do the test. So
Wow.
400 for him and 400 for me, and I couldn't afford that. Um,
Okay.
I followed the
$800.
lead.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I followed the lead, and there were similarities, and I ended up talking to this guy's mom, and she was just so happy to know she had a granddaughter out there, and she sent me things, and like she sent me a duffel bag so that I could pack it and come visit, and she sent me
Wow.
photos. Yeah, like she was really
Yeah.
sweet, very welcoming. Um, and you know, so like I believed it, and then I I'm very tenacious when it comes to trying to find information. So I spent hours trying to find this guy's son. He had a son he was estranged from that had the same name as him. And I spent hours on Google searches, and probably about 30 or 40 pages in, I found him. He had commented on somebody's art gallery posting, an online art gallery, and left his email address. And
Oh, that's incredible. So you had
yeah,
to go through all these posts in order to get, but you were able to get his email.
yep. And so I emailed him and I was like, "Are you by chance the son of so and so?" And he was like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay, well, I gotta tell you something." And then I wrote him this email, and it took a couple of days for him to respond. But he was right there, man, and he believed it. He saw pictures of me. I saw pictures of him. There were some similarities, and yeah. So we actually met a few times. He lives out in Missouri, and we met a couple times. He's really, really nice guy. And so for 16 years, I thought he was my brother. And Christmas 2017, my adoptive sister got me a DNA test for Christmas. And because I've been wanting to do one to fill in my ancestry tree that I had been working on. And
Just out of curiosity, it was one DNA test. Which DNA test kit was it?
ancestry,
Okay,
because I
that's
was
the
doing the
larger.
ancestry tree, so I wanted it to link. And
Got it.
so I did it. I was so careful in how I did it. Like I did it first thing in the morning, and there was no chance of food. Like I was so anal in how I did the DNA test to make sure I didn't screw it up. And sent it off, and I got the results back in February. And I call him my not brother now. He also got a
Wow.
DNA test kit, and we found out that we were not brother and sister. And so that was really hard because we had developed this relationship for 16 years. And but I still didn't have any answers as to who my dad was, because the name that was my closest connection didn't really make sense. It said it was a cousin, but it was like a 94-year-old person. And so I had to use a Facebook DNA group and ask for advice, and they're like, it could be an uncle.
Okay.
And long story short, I talked to that person who managed that tree. She gave me access to it. And one night, literally right after my episode released on Who Am I Really with Damon Davis, and I told this whole story, literally the next day, I figured out that that first guy was actually my dad. And
The guy in the bar
yep, the guy in the bar
who
is
pointed
actually,
you to a different man.
yes, yes. And
Oh,
so I called him and said, hey, I did DNA, and my closest DNA match is your uncle. And he was like, wow. And that was all he could pretty much say was wow. And then I was like, oh, and by the way, you're a grandfather now. And then it was like another big wow.
right.
And
So this is 16, 17 years since you met him in the bar, right?
yes, yes. And the last time I had seen him had been the day after my grandfather's funeral, um, which was in 2004. So it'd been some time, but he still remembered exactly who I was. And he apologized. He's like, I'm sorry for leading you on a wild goose chase. So I still don't know if he did it on purpose or if he actually believed it, and I'll never know. And it just has to be okay that way. But I have a little half sister, little, she's taller than me, but I have a half sister who is like 17 and a half years younger than me. But I adore her. We both want to do counseling. And
Oh, yeah. Can you tell people, I understand that you're studying social work. I don't know that field, so I don't know how that happens. And I'm excited that someone who's had the experiences you have is going to be out there in counseling, hopefully.
well, so Janet Nordine, do you know
Oh,
her?
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she creates a list of adoptees that are also therapists. And I was in therapy at the time, seeing this wonderful therapist that I had to spend the whole first year training her about adoption because but she was open to it, and she bought the books that I suggested. She owns the practice. She bought books for everybody that works in the practice so that they could learn, which was really great because at least she was open to it. She has since retired, but she went back to school later in life.
Okay.
And I asked her, if you were going to go back to school for counseling, and again, I said, what major would you pick? Because I didn't know if I should do social work or psychology or counseling or what. And she said she would have picked social work. And I was like, really? And she's like, yeah. And she said there's more job opportunities and just a different perspective. Um, so on a whim, I applied to community college and got in at 47.
Oops, I think we're losing you when you turn your head, so we didn't hear
I'm
the last
sorry.
part of
But
that. No,
yeah,
that's
I
fine.
just one day on a whim I applied to community college and I got in. And so at 47, I
Yay.
went back to school. So community college took me 3 years because I was going to school around my son's schedule because he was much younger at the time. But I graduated with my associates in psychology, and social work was liberal arts with social work major. And
Okay.
I transferred from there to West Liberty University, and I'm this close to my bachelor's degree. I didn't quite finish because I got extremely burned out. And with ADHD and no accommodations, and I don't take medication, I really struggle with executive function. And so I tend to procrastinate. Somehow I still got good grades, but
Hmm.
I was working on I only work well under pressure and was constantly stressing myself out. And I had started drinking like a bit too much. And like I was kind of a mess. And so I did my internship. It's where I'm working now. It's a mental health crisis unit, and I really like
Oh,
it a lot.
that's
Um,
great.
yeah,
That's
so
great to really find a place and yeah, a place where you can be happy and useful and have it
yeah,
work like that.
the coworkers are great, and that's why I went back there after I finished my internship, because we're a really good team, and it's really interesting because it's drug detox, which as in mental health med management. And as you know, adoptees are overrepresented in mental health and substance use disorder. So I
Are you seeing that in your work right now? Is it a large
um
enough
if
population
they're
to
not
kind of say that?
if they're not adopted, they don't know their mom, like, or there was some other trauma in their lives. Invariably, it seems like it's all rooted in trauma. I when I do their assessment and you have to ask about their family history,
Mhm,
um, I've noticed a pattern where if they started, drinking alcohol at 14, something happened when they were 14, that was really bad in their lives.
mhm.
And that there's like a real pattern that way. And or they lost one parent, or the parents were fighting and split up, and things like that. A lot of trauma. And of course, there are still the ones that come through that got hooked on Oxycontin and that mess, and
Yeah,
are still trying to cope with that situation from being prescribed pain meds you know
right. So I wanna, kind of, ask some questions, and we're
sure.
getting to the time where I'm supposed to, also open it up so other people can ask questions. But before we do that, um, are there favorite conversations that you've had over the years in one of your Facebook groups or one of the Instagram or TikTok threads that really come to mind? I'll say favorite or most surprising, or one that you just want to share with everyone.
Well, when okay, I used to have like that anger that I had directed towards my birth mom for a long time,
Hmm.
when I was coming out of the fog and learning about the realities of the adoption industry and everything. I was really pissed off still. I had a lot of anger I didn't know what to do with. And I would like get into stupid arguments online and things like that. And then I found making memes. And so I channel that into snarky memes now on Instagram. And well, I got
Okay.
away from them for a while for TikTok because TikTok was taking up a lot of my time, but I've started making them again recently. Um,
Okay. I'll look for
but
him.
the memes that I've made on Instagram, every so often I will get a private message from somebody on Instagram or on Facebook or on TikTok that is like, wow, I really learned something that I didn't know about adoption.
Okay.
And the most profound thing that has happened, due to Instagram, was I had this woman reach out to me. And
Hmm.
initially, she didn't tell me the whole story because I think she was afraid of being judged. Um, she was the director of a small adoption agency in Florida.
Oh. Oh.
Yeah. And from my memes, she learned stuff, and it eventually came out that she was also an adoptive parent, and she had two children she adopted at birth, and they were open adoptions. But the mom of the older child was struggling with
Hmm.
visits, and like she would get re-traumatized, and so she wasn't visiting as much. And so she was seeing how this was affecting her daughter, because her other child, the mom was in the life of that child. And so she had these two very different relationships going on.
With the two different mother-child pairs.
Yes,
Sure.
and the older child was having a lot of trauma responses and behavior issues, and I think my memes just like set a light bulb off, like, holy shit, this is related to being adopted. And, you know, she, um, I'll try to get into the shorter version of it. She ended up, they changed how they do everything, and they will still facilitate adoptions. They don't seek out moms, they don't facilitate adoptions as in like advertising. If somebody has like an expectant mom and a couple are paired up on their own and they come, they will do the home study, they will process the paperwork and all that, but they are way more picky about the home studies now.
Oh,
um
good.
they don't adopt to people that are not child centered, and they've actually been blasted on like Yelp and Google reviews because they did not facilitate an adoption, a couple adoptions for people that wanted to, because they didn't feel it was in the best interest. And now the agency has merged with another agency, and they are more towards family preservation. They offer respite care on weekends for like young moms who, get overwhelmed and just need some time away from their child. They have this foster family that will take the child on the weekend to give the mom a break because she's young and she can still be young and do stuff or work or, do things around the house. But they are more focused on trying to help families stay together and providing services in that realm. So that was a huge shift, and that was a really big deal. Um, it makes it worth it to hear about things like that.
That you
Anytime
were able to
somebody,
change that.
anytime somebody reaches out and I got through to them, like it might be 1% of the people, um, it's a big deal because with adoption, it's like a belief system, like a religion or anything else. People believe in adoption because there's been so much propaganda in our culture. Adoption is in movies and books and TV shows, and they
Oh
only
my
show
gosh.
it as either a horror story or it's just this amazing fantasy. And
Jen, it was interesting. Dr. Uh, Abby Hasbury used the term grooming. There's almost grooming in
yes,
society.
exactly.
People that, if the birth mother says, no, I'm going to raise my own child, that's a
She's
bad
selfish.
birth mother. There's all this grooming about adoption good, family preservation bad. And then there's a lot of people that have more nuance, but
Oh yeah.
just hearing that word grooming kind of got me thinking when we were talking earlier.
Yeah, I've been studying like the history of adoption. I mean, there's gaps, there's things I have not learned about yet. Like I haven't done any research on Gladney or on
Mhm.
Holt International and things like that. Mostly I focus on Georgia Tan, but overall history of adoption. And if
Mhm.
you really step back and look at the timeline, you can see how like the baby scoop ended, but immediately like the demand was there for infants, so they had to find other ways to procure them. So international adoption started getting popular, and transracial adoption and open adoptions, and like anything that they could do to like keep getting the product in, you know. Once the
Mhm.
agencies were in existence, they didn't want to go out of business, and it's ugly.
Mhm.
But
It is
Lisa
a
Lane
business,
Scott will
and
get into all that.
businesses preserve themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Real quick, it's 8:20. We have 10 minutes. I'd love, I don't know, maybe Beth can see if people are raising hands, that if anyone else has a question they'd like to ask, that they have
That's a good
one.
thing for us to do now. Ask for questions, and right before we take any questions, I am going to stop the recording, and then I will be able to put some links in the chat as well. So please raise your
Terrific.
hand if you have a question.